Welcome back to College Football Addiction. I'm going to talk a little bit about this Penn State SMU game with Tom Hannifan, State of State, a Penn State football show, part of the Believe podcast network. Man, I can't believe that it's already college football playoff week. But Tom, how you doing, bud?
I'm great, man. I've seen some of the weather forecasts for Penn State versus SMU, and as much as a fan, as an alum, as someone who covers a team, I'd love to be there. I'm really okay not going to 15-degree weather in Happy Valley in late December. Like, I don't wish to be any member of the SMU football team traveling from Dallas into that.
Yeah, I assume you're here with me in Florida, just based on are you in Florida as well?
No, I'm actually outside of Philadelphia, so I'm kind
Oh,
of like
okay.
getting parts of this, but State College, it's just a completely different weather system in the valley. It's completely different.
Yeah, sounds pretty awful. I had some friends actually at church on Sunday ask me like, "Hey, are you going to any of the games?" And I was like, first of all, the only one I would consider is in Austin, and but no, I'm not. Right? Like I want to see all of them, and so to do
Sure.
that, you can't go to any of them. And but yeah, I would not even think about the three up north. So,
Pass.
speaking of that, can you even begin to describe the chaos that will kind of unfold in State College starting on about maybe Thursday afternoon or Friday morning?
Yeah, I think Thursday, Friday makes a lot of sense. Listen, this is something Penn State fans have wanted for a very long time, whether it was to make it to the 14 college football playoff or now the 12-team college football playoff. It's been nearly 40 years since Penn State won a national championship. And what myself and my broadcast colleague, Justin King, former Penn State and NFL defensive back, have talked about on State of State is, can Penn State credibly win the national championship? And I think the fun thing about this field, I know there was all the hoopla over should Alabama be in, should SMU be in. It feels like everybody in this field has the ability to beat everybody else. It does feel like that kind of wide open space. I think Oregon is in a tier by itself. I think Georgia, depending on what goes down for them at quarterback, that's kind of a grab bag and makes them a big question mark. But Penn State's fortunate right now in that, most experts believe that Penn State has the easiest path at least to the semifinal. That's not to throw any shade at SMU or Boise State, just in terms of strength of schedule, overall body of work. Penn State should have better personnel than them. So I think it's a great path that's laid out for them, but the 1-0 James Franklin mentality has to be the only mentality this coming weekend, because if you don't beat SMU at home with everything in your advantage, a whiteout, bad weather, all that stuff, then there will be a massive amount of questions pointed at James Franklin.
Yeah, and that narrative for Franklin exists that there are other coaches that's existed for, but the big narrative there has always been, can he win the big game? Can he get that done? And so coming off of the Big Ten championship, they played close, lost by one score. Is the mood around Penn State, and I would say, I don't know how close you are with the program or if you have contacts in or around it. Is the mood more like motivating, like, hey, we were right there, we took them to the wire, one score game, or is it like, man, we dropped another massive game and now we've got to go into the playoff? Like, where's the mood at more coming off of that Big Ten game?
I think it's very much we were within one possession of dethroning the number one team in the country and winning the Big Ten title. And had it not been for some costly penalties and the two turnovers, the interceptions by Drew Aller were costly in that game. That was still Penn State's best offensive performance of the year. And that's been the enormous question about the Nittany Lions, is that you've seen how Tom Allen and his defense have really played well this season, ratcheting things up in the third and fourth quarter, just dominant performances, especially in the third quarter. The question was, can Penn State hang with people offensively? And then you kind of get the inverse in this game against Oregon, that you're able to hang 37 on Oregon, you give up 45. So there's a lot of things defensively you have to clean up. But I think the positive thing is you've had 2 weeks now to kind of lick your wounds, get organized. Transfer portal has opened up. Your backup quarterback, Bo Perbula, who was a factor in your offense, into the transfer portal. Drew Aller has announced that he's staying for 2025. Andy Kotelnicki, the offensive coordinator, says he's staying for 2025. For the most part, outside of an injury to right tackle Anthony Donko from the Minnesota game a number of weeks ago, you're relatively intact. You don't have too many major injuries. People can point to KJ Winston at safety, who went out in September. So you've had plenty of time to form an identity without that player. So I think it's overall positivity that it's like, hey, had a couple of things gone our way and we cleaned things up in terms of the turnovers, we could have beaten Oregon. And I think that's something about this season I was just touching on. Yeah, Oregon is in a tier by itself, but Oregon nearly lost to Ohio State, was in a game against Idaho. That Boise State even pushed them. So
Wisconsin, yeah.
everybody, yeah, Wisconsin, absolute great example, 16-13 in Madison. So it's
Yeah.
a situation where I feel like everybody has weaknesses that can be exploited.
So looking at SMU specifically, I kind of they're. I am not comparing them to Oregon before some Oregon fan jumps in here and jumps on, into my comments. Like I understand that they are playing at different levels, but they have some similarities on offense. I like to get
I
the ball
agree.
out quickly. They, very mobile quarterback. Kevin, everything runs through Jennings, who is so calm, cool, and collected, even after some mistakes early in that ACC championship game, led them back and really probably would have won it overtime if not for kind of a crazy long field goal. But just thoughts on, is that a glass? Are you a glass half full or glass half empty guy? Is it a good thing that you've gotten preparation for it, or is it a bad thing that Oregon put up 45? Could SMU score a lot of points too? Just thoughts on the offense for SMU.
I'm normally a glass half empty person, but in this situation, I completely agree with you in that evaluation. SMU to me feels like Oregon light, and that's no slight against the Mustangs. It's just Oregon has elite personnel at just about every position, very few gaps in their roster. But the one thing I saw in the Big Ten championship game is that you had these alphas at wide receiver that Oregon was able to really just go off with explosive plays. Tez Johnson was basically unguardable in that game. SMU doesn't have that type of talent at wide receiver, still very capable at wide receiver. And I think Jennings is the straw that stirs the drink, so to speak. Jennings is interesting in that 7 of his 8 interceptions have not happened against a design blitz. They've happened against the front 4 getting home because he likes to be able to move around in the pocket. Dillon Gabriel presented a similar problem for Penn State. Penn State's linebackers and safeties were absolutely gassed by the third and fourth quarter. Gabriel, I think, obviously he's a Heisman finalist, is a better product at quarterback than Kevin Jennings. He's more polished as a passer and reading the defense. Kevin Jennings can throw you an interception. He can make some mistakes in the passing game. We saw how mightily the offense struggled in the first half against Clemson, the ACC championship game. I think Jennings' ability to extend plays and get outside the pocket, Penn State's going to have a better plan than what they faced against Oregon, but you should feel a little bit more comfortable because if you stop the run in bad weather and you put the game on Jennings to try and throw at volume in that situation, I think that gives Penn State a great chance to win.
Yeah. So speaking of stopping the run, Brashard Smith might be the best running back in the ACC. I know that Damian Martinez was really good for Miami. I know that Phil Maffa, when fully healthy, was really good for Clemson too. So nothing against from those guys, but Brashard Smith's been really good. What I worry about, or what I wonder about, and maybe want to get your take, is how good can SMU be up front against a really good Penn State front? And Brashard Smith himself, yeah, I'll just say, I think he was the best running back in the ACC this year. You're only as good as your line, though, right? Like, there are certainly running backs that can compensate for that. But to me, that feels like maybe one of the bigger advantages that Penn State has in this matchup. I'm not down on SMU's line. I'm probably just a little higher on Penn State's D line in front.
I agree with you, especially in the trenches on both sides of the ball. I like Penn State's offensive line against SMU's defensive line. That's no slight to their defensive ends. They're more power rushers than pass rushers, and I think that really helps the way Penn State's offensive line and offensive scheme is constructed. But for Penn State's defensive line specifically, they have some disruptive, game-wrecking defensive tackles, Devontae Thomas and Zane Durant. They're not necessarily going to get sacks, but they are just going to muck up the center of the field. Defensive ends, Abdul Carter and Denai Dennis Sutton, if they're able to get home, then it's going to be a really long day for SMU and Kevin Jennings. And having seen the way that Clemson's defensive line affected the running game for SMU, affected Kevin Jennings, Penn State's defensive line personnel is much better than Clemson. So that's my concern. If I'm an SMU fan, I feel pretty good about Penn State's chances in that department.
Yeah, backing up a little bit on the defense, I was really impressed with the way that SMU's defensive backs played. I thought it was the most underrated part of the second half of the ACC championship. Klubnik had no windows to throw. When he was trying to fit balls in, they had about 1 billion pass breakups in that game. Now, your DBs are only as good as your front is at putting pressure on Aller, right? So, I don't think they have 4 Deion Sanders out there that can just completely shut a guy down for 6 seconds. But what are your thoughts on Penn State's weapons out wide versus SMU's pretty talented secondary?
Yeah, that's going to be the real battle because it's a lot of cover three from SMU. And in the past, games against Ohio State, games against Oregon, those teams pretty much have doubled Tyler Warren and run man everywhere else. So if SMU is comfortable sitting in a zone, I think Penn State's going to have some opportunities. Zone defense doesn't really phase Drew Aller. He's just got to make the right decisions. And he makes the wrong decision like a fraction percent of the time. That last interception that he threw against Oregon, he had Tyler Warren in a deep crossing route over the middle. He got locked in and maybe just didn't see the safety ultimately on that read. He doesn't make mistakes like that too often. Now, Penn State doesn't have too many wide receivers that scare anybody, unfortunately. They have some reliable wide receivers, not going to have a lot of drops, but they're struggling to get open most of this season. There's part of me that expects one, Tyler Warren is going to get his targets in a variety of capacities, whether it's out of the Wildcat, throwing or running the football, but especially catching the football. They'll try and get him the ball minimum 8 times in the passing game. It's what do you do outside of that? If you're able to take away Tyler Warren or at least limit him, who are the other threats? I would look to see if tight ends Khalil Dinkins and Luke Reynolds for Penn State are a factor in this game. If you're able to work the seams within that cover three, two big bodied 265-pound tight ends in 15-degree weather slamming into you in the secondary,
Sounds
you're
awful.
not going to want to tackle that. So I'm curious to see if that's the way Andy Kotelnicki goes. And again, Kotelnicki's had 2 weeks to prepare for this. Perbula is out of the mix. How does he replace that creativity? That's a big question.
It's no, I'm not dropping anything massive here that teams like to start quick, but it has been almost vital for SMU this year. And the games that they've started quick, and that's a very Rhett Lashley, Mike Norvell, Gus Malzahn type thing. Like that
Yep.
is certainly the angle that they want to come from is get a lead, get up by 10, and see if the other team can keep up with you, right? And so I can't imagine a situation where they go down 2 or 3 scores like they did in the ACC championship and come back. And so a quick start for SMU feels almost vital in this game. Now I'll say that and they'll go down 17 and it'll be a tie game going to the fourth
Right.
just because I've
The
said it.
universe is kind. Yeah.
Yeah. But, if things play out like we think, maybe is a better way to phrase it. If SMU gets off to a quick start, I think it certainly sets them up for more success. Not that Penn State can't come back, not that Aller can't get hot or anything like that. But any kind of thoughts on Penn State trying to kind of counter that by starting quick themselves, or try what they may do to limit a quick start from SMU?
I agree with you that if SMU gets out to a fast start, it's going to make it more challenging for Penn State. Penn State has struggled offensively with having fast starts this season. And again, I talk about that Big Ten championship game against Oregon. You were keeping pace there for a minute, and then all of a sudden it's 28-10 in the middle of the second quarter, and you really had to dig there in the second half. They had to dig against USC. They had to dig against Minnesota. And those were games that were, high 20s, low 30s in terms of scoring for Penn State. So if there is a world where SMU can turn this into a track meet, that is really going to help them. But I think Penn State defensively, you have to be able to get home and affect these offensive tackles for SMU to really limit what Kevin Jennings is able to do. But again, I said it before, I really think Penn State's linebackers, there has to be something different done in this game to be able to contain Jennings, whomever that is going to be spying him, whether it's going to be Jalen Reed, who was in a car accident earlier on this week, seems to be okay, but like just the sheer volume of things happening right now is pretty incredible. But your primary linebackers and Kobe King and Tony Rojas struggled against Oregon. So how are you going to cover that up? How are you going to protect those weaknesses? If Jennings and company are able to play backyard ball there in the first quarter, for instance, that could be a problem.
Yeah. You talked about a big advantage being probably Penn State in the trenches, and we've talked about Jennings, and so we may have already kind of covered this, but if you had a major concern or your biggest concern from the Penn State side, is it Jennings kind of being able to toss the ball around? Is it him getting loose? What are your thoughts there on a big concern for Penn State?
For me, it continues to be offensively. Penn State does not have a wide receiver that scares anybody right now. And it's unfortunate because I think Harrison Wallace, known as Trey Wallace to Penn State football fans, has ability, but he is just kind of steady Eddie. Liam Clifford, Julian Fleming, the transfer from Ohio State, have been relative non-factors this season. I'm curious to see if Omari Evans, number 5 for Penn State, is more of a factor in this game because he's the type of guy who can take the top off of the defense, and they've used him in a variety of capacities so far this year. That's the only point where it really becomes a problem is because Tyler Warren has gotten his numbers. He's like Steph Curry. He's going to drop 30. You just need to kind of limit it from ballooning to 50, 60, 70. Tyler Warren will get his numbers, but then it's who else is going to step up. I really think the signature player in this game for Penn State is going to be Katron Allen at running back. Again, I come back to the temperature, the weather, all that stuff, getting a team from Dallas traveling to central Pennsylvania in late December. Katron Allen lives between the tackles. My broadcast colleague Justin King has compared him to Frank Gore in terms of a running style. Imagine that guy hitting you in the chin for 4 quarters, and then you supplement that with Nick Singleton, his explosivity. So I think that's going to be a real key, and it's hopefully going to mask that wide receiver deficiency for Penn State.
So we're a few days out from kickoff, recording this on a Tuesday afternoon. So certainly things can change. But do you have a lean in this? Do you have a prediction? Do you think Penn State does end up coming away with the win at home?
I think Penn State can win it. I think I've seen outlets where it's anywhere from +7 for Penn State to +8.5. It just depends on what outlet you look at. I'm a little nervous about that type of a spread. I might like SMU to cover, but still I think Penn State is ultimately going to walk out with the win. I think it's going to be competitive. I think, to your point, the first quarter could be a little slow for both teams because both teams have had issues getting started early on. Penn State really strangles teams from a defensive standpoint in the second half. So kind of banking on that and relying on Tom Allen to make those changes in the second half. But I feel comfortable that Penn State comes away with the win in this one.
Yeah, should be a lot of fun. It's hard to imagine some of these Southern teams when you look at all these, Indiana and Notre Dame's maybe the exception, but some of these Southern teams going and playing up north this weekend, with the Tennessee going to the shoe and obviously SMU traveling up to Penn State, how they, the old adage was, give those SEC teams, make them go play up north and see how they play. And I know SMU's not an SEC team, but we'll see how the, team from Knoxville plays up in Columbus, and then obviously how a team from Dallas plays as well. But I kind of lean Penn State here. Could SMU pull it off? Sure, they've got a lot of talent, and it should be a fun game. I actually kind of like all. I almost like all four underdogs to cover, but all four favorites to win this weekend.
Yeah, it's weird that you would think, oh, just go chalk on this one. It's plausible in either direction. And again, I think that's the fun thing about this. I think the difference in terms of Penn State hosting a home game, and this is kind of a little disrespect to Ohio State and Notre Dame, but like Penn State far and away is the scariest home environment to walk into in terms of the fan noise, the whiteout atmosphere, the fan base craving this for, as I mentioned, damn near 40 years to be able to compete like this. I think it's going to be a really hostile environment for SMU. You just don't get that same type of feel in Austin, Columbus, or South Bend.
Yeah. And Indiana being so close, they'll have plenty of fans there. I've spoken with Notre Dame folks about that, them selling a lot of their tickets. Tennessee has such a, the Southeastern Conference fans travel extremely well. And then, I don't know how, if Austin has that same intimidation factor. So, no, I'm with you there, especially in this playoff. But, Tom, where can people follow you? Where can they find your work and more of your content, bud?
Yeah, check me out on X and Instagram at Tom Hannifan, Hannifan. You can check out State of State, a Penn State football show on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. Also within the Believe Podcast Network, myself and Big Ten Network and NFL Network host Rhett Lewis. We both are on the Believe in Big Ten show. So anything you need in regards to Big Ten football, I literally will talk about it nonstop. So check that out wherever you get your podcasts.
Awesome, man. Well, I appreciate you for taking some time, man. Good luck this weekend.
Thanks for having me.